Thank you. Well, like Gary said, my name is Helen Redmond. I'm a master food preserver and a master gardener. I became a master food preserver because I needed to know what to do with my produce. I am not one of those canners that learned from her grandmother's knee. I didn't can for the first time until probably 2014, and I shook the entire time that I canned at home. But I've gotten more confident as time has gone by. Alice, do you want to talk about the second slide? This is the slide that you added.
Certainly, I can certainly talk about that. And that just shows the different classes we have. Again, Friday is edible flowers. Next Tuesday, we have weed control and lawns and gardens and your landscape. And so those are the two classes. And then you can see some of the classes that are coming up in the future. Again, if you ever attend or ever find that you cannot attend a class, these classes are all being recorded. Just let me know, and I'm happy to send you that recording. I usually get it about an hour or two after, or notified an hour or two after the class. And so you can certainly go in and do that. If you'd like to be notified of these classes, the connection information, just send me an email, and you'll automatically get the connection information right before class. So with that, Helen, I'll turn it back to you, and on to your next slide.
Thank you. Okay, today what our goals are to become familiar with the very basics of water bath canning and the tools that you'll need to water bath can. We're not going to talk about pressure canning today. And the history of canning. Canning started in the late 1700s. And Napoleon Bonaparte was the one that kind of ordered his troops to can, and they did, of course, in very different ways that we can now. 27% of the people preserve food at home, and nearly half of them got information from family and friends. Recipes before 1988 are not recommended. Not that they're necessarily not safe, but they haven't been tested. To get started, reviewing tested recipes is very important, and all those recipes need to be up to date. They need to be since 1989. They need to be from reliable sources such as the WSU Extension publications, and their website is there. We also have a book called So Easy to Preserve, and I know that there's a couple of copies of those books in the Cowlitz County Extension. The books are $30 a piece if you buy them from the Extension. They're also available from the Clark County Extension, but you do have to call in order to meet somebody to buy one of the books right now. The other really good resource is the NCHFP, which is the National Center for Home Food Preservation, and they have a website, and all their recipes are approved. And when I say approved, they've been tested. They've been tested like hundreds of times. Internet recipes and sources really have to be approved. One of the things you're going to want to determine is your elevation, because it will affect the amount of time that you need to do water bath canning. You can use a GPS unit, or you can go to the website that's noted here, and you can find out exactly what your elevation is. 1,000 feet is the number. If you're above 1,000, your times are going to change. And in all of the approved canning books, those times are noted. You're going to determine which canning method to use. And like I said, we're going to talk mainly about only about water bath canning today. And water bath canning is only for foods that are high acid foods. And pH is the measure of acidity. The lower the pH, more acid the food. The higher pH, the less acid the food. And here's some common pH levels of foods. You can see lemons are very high acid, even though their numbers are low. And things like asparagus the numbers are high, but they're low acid. They're considered low acid foods. 4.6 is the lowest activity that you can safely use for water bath canning. And you can see tomatoes are kind of on the cusp. And one of the reasons is some of the different tomato varieties might be less acidic than others. So you always have to acidify tomatoes when you water bath can them. Acid that have a pH of 4.6 have enough acid in them to prevent the growth of bacteria. And those include all the what you see on the left, with the exception of figs, Asian pears, you can see their numbers are higher, melons, bananas, papayas, but tomatoes are on this higher level. But like I said, they are on the cusp. And also white peaches. You can very safely can yellow peaches, but not white peaches. And you can see the safety things, anything that is pickled. Like, for instance, even though you don't see beans on this list, beans are considered low acid. But if you make dilly beans and you can water bath can dilly beans. And the same with asparagus. Make pickled asparagus. Okay, here again, water bath versus pressure canning. And most pickled foods are always good. There is a pressure canning class, and the link to that will be on our website that you can take through Clark County. Boiling water canners. Okay, these are going to be used for high acid foods. You can use any type of big kettle. It doesn't have to be anything special. It does have to have a tight fitting lid, and you've got to be able to fit a rack in the bottom, and you have to be able to cover the jars with 1 or 2 inches, 1 to 2 inches of water. So it's got to be a large pot. Also, the diameter of the pot can't be more than 4 inches wider than a burner surface. And I'm kind of talking about a gas top. And a lot of us don't have gas top stoves in our homes. You can use a solid element or smooth top, but that has to be no more than 1 to 2 inches wider than the surface. Concave canners, like light aluminum pots, the concave part can't be more than 1/8 inch or it won't heat well. They can be used on gas ranges. There are ridge bottom canners that also can be used on gas. Boiling water canners that are not recommended are steam canners. WSU Extension has not recommended steam canners. I know they have them on the market, but they're not recommended. The other type of canning that's not recommended is oven canning. Open kettle canning, which is what Grandma used to use in a lot of cases, and I'm on quite a few web pages and Facebook pages where people say, I've done this all my life and nothing's bad. And what they do is they take a jar, a warm jar, they fill it with a hot product, put the top on, screw the lid on, and put it upside down like you can see in this slide. Well, it'll seal. You'll find that they'll seal, so it will appear to be safe, but the temperature inside isn't high enough to kill any spoilage organisms. And it's absolutely not recommended. The other thing that's not recommended is dishwashing processing, which I just think is kind of amusing. You can't process in your dishwasher. If you have one of these stoves, it's always kind of a challenge. What you should do is you should call the manufacturer of the stove and check, because some of them heat up and then they go down, and heat up and they go down, and you've got to be able to maintain a steady boil. What is not recommended in these slides is, or maybe it will, I don't think it is, but it's the Ball has an electric water bath canner. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's the best thing ever. And one of the positives I think about it is you don't have to move a heavy canner full of water to the stove. You don't have to lift it. And I think as we get older, it's more difficult to lift heavy pots. But what you do is, what I do is I put it right next to my sink, and then I have one of the, I can take the water from the sink, fill it up. It has a little spigot on the bottom, and you just make sure that spigot is open when you drain it. You can control the spigot from the outside of the canner, and then fill the product. You have a rack on the bottom. It definitely holds all the jars that you may be wanting to can. But then when you're finished, you just open the spigot after you've taken the jars out, of course, and no lifting. All that water goes back in the sink. Yeah, many stovetops, those flat tops like I have, they have automatic cutoffs. And it's not continuous boiling, and that's what you need. Some of these kind of ranges are fine for canning. You just have to make sure that the overhang on these elements aren't more than 1 to 2 inches. It's called a solid element burner. And you want to make sure that if it's got any concave part to it, it's not more than 1/8 of an inch. These are magnetic field, generates heat into a magnetic cook pot. I'm not familiar with that. But the only pots made of cast iron, 3-ply stainless steel that contain carbon steel core, enameled steel. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not at all familiar with this kind of induction cooktop. What I use for outside canning is a chef stove. They recommend it not to be over 12,000 BTUs. It's a propane burner because it gets too hot and it can warp the bottom of your canner. But if you find that sweet spot where you can get it to boil, it works fine. And then what you can do right over here, you can mark the sweet spot on the stove so that you can always get it at the same place and you don't ruin your canner. Okay, some of the utensils that you're going to use. You're going to use a funnel, you're going to use a ladle, a bubble releaser, jar lifter. Lid lifter and wand is no longer anything that's terribly necessary because we don't boil the lids anymore. You're going to need a clean, damp cloth or paper towel. Paper towel works just fine. Of course, pot holders, towels, and a timer. The appropriate jars and lids for home canning are only the Ball and Mason jars. It's got to be a commercial canning jar. Don't try to use an old mayonnaise jar, even though it looks like it should work well. Or there's some jars that the lids and screw tops work on, and I think it's a Prego or something, but the glass isn't thick enough to safely use for canning. There's many sizes. There's 4 ounce, half pint, pint, 1.5 pint, quart, and half gallon. The only time you use a half gallon for juice is for juices. You wouldn't use it for any other product. And there's different sizes of the mouth of the jar. There's either a wide mouth that's 3 inches or regular mouth that's 2 3/8 inches. When you're going to, and you can buy jars from yard sales. I've bought many of my jars from yard sales. I take them home and you check that you run your finger around the rim of the jar to check to see if there's any nicks or any scratches. You don't want anything like that. And then I just run mine through the dishwasher to clean them up well. If they have any kind of mineral deposits, vinegar will take care of that. So no matter what, even if you have clean jars right out of the box, you're going to wash the empty jars in hot water and soap, rinse them well, keep them hot until they're ready to use. And I keep mine hot in my electric water bath canner until I'm ready to use them. You don't have, oh, sterilizing. People talk about sterilizing jars. Any product that you're going to process for less than 10 minutes will require sterilization. If you process a product longer than 10 minutes or longer, you don't need to sterilize the jars. So there is no product that I use that I process in less than 10 minutes because I don't want to sterilize the jars. Lids. Wash the lids with soap and water, rinse, and then keep them in warm water. Don't boil the new lids. A lot of people say, oh, well, I've always boiled them. I'm going to boil them because that's how I got a safe product. What happened is they changed the rubber. It's not really rubber, but they changed the product on the lid, and now you don't have to boil them. If you do boil them, they're not going to seal as well as if you don't boil them. Don't reuse them. Always use new lids when you can. Rings. You can reuse the rings as much as you want. They should be free of dust and dents. And last year, I canned tuna, and somebody said, oh, well, save all your tuna, put it in a tuna pack because you're going to want to not use those screw tops for anything but the tuna. They didn't tell me that I had to soak those well and wash them. So I got them out this year because I'm planning on doing tuna, and I soaked them in water with a lot of baking soda, and they cleaned up beautifully. But now I know, and I'll clean them immediately. Okay, pack jars correctly. Use a canning funnel. I don't know if you've seen a canning funnel, but it makes it easier and less messy to put your product in the jars. You can either pack hot or raw according to instructions. Don't overfill. And then you cover the product with boiling water. Liquid, not water. This jar kind of shows you the approximate headspace. Headspace is pretty important. Starchy foods will require more headspace, and jams and jelly require less. If you have too little headspace for the product, the food expands and bubbles over the jar, and it might prevent it from sealing. If you have too much headspace, that's not good either. It changes the color, and excess air might grow into mold. Sealing the jars correctly. After you have filled your jars with product, you're going to take a washcloth or a paper towel. I use a paper towel. Oh, first I get rid of the bubbles. And you can get rid of the bubbles with one of the bubble releasers that they have, or you can use a chopstick, or you can use a plastic knife. Just don't use metal because metal will harm the inside of the jar. So you're going to first release the bubbles, and after you release the bubbles, you might have to adjust the headspace. You might have to add a little more product, or take out a little, but probably add a little. Then you're going to want to wipe each rim with the clean cloth. Sometimes you can put, if it's you can use a little vinegar on the top. That will for sure get it clean. So you might just take the paper towel and soak it in a little bit of water and vinegar, and you clean it well, and then you put the ring over the lid, and then you put the flat lid on, and then you put the screw top on it, and you're going to Put that on until it's fingertip tight. And fingertip tight, I think, comes with a little practice. You're going to screw the top on until you feel the resistance and then position a little tighter than that. You don't want to crank it down because if it's too loose, you'll lose liquid and the seal might fail. But if it's too tight, then the air can't escape and the food will discolor, but even worse, the lids will buckle. I've had a lot of Facebook people show pictures of product and the lid was all buckled and everybody said you just screwed it on too tight. So you've got to get it fingertip tight. Then you're going to have your canner will be halfway filled with water. They say to preheat the water to 140 for raw packed food, 180 for hot packed food. That's so that you don't break any jars. You load the properly filled jars into the on the canner rack and then lower it in boiling water if you have one of those racks. I don't have one of those racks. I just use the jar lifter and put it on top of the rack. And add more boiling water so that everything is covered with 1 to 2 inches of water. Put the canning lid on, and on the Ball electric canner, the lid is glass, so you can very easily look in to see when you've got a really hot, vigorous boil going. As soon as you've got that boil going, and it could take a few minutes, you set your timer that's adjusted to the altitude that you're at, and at the end of the timer, you turn off the heat and you remove the lid. And then you turn the timer on for 5 more minutes. After those 5 minutes, you use your jar lifter and you lift that jar straight out and over to a surface that has a towel on it, hopefully. I like to use a big cookie sheet. I put a towel on the cookie sheet. That way, if I have to move the jars, I can just lift and move the whole cookie sheet over. You can use a wooden cutting board if you're not. Don't tighten the rings. Don't do anything. Just wait 24 hours without touching it. And when you do remove the jars, you're very tempted to pour off the liquid on the top. You don't have to. Those jars are hot enough that as soon as you have them on the towel or whatever surface you're going to have, it'll evaporate. So you won't have a problem with any of the jars. So you're going to let it cool down for 24 hours without touching it. You'll hear that nice little click, click, click sound. Sometimes it even happens still in the canner where the jars seal, and that's the jar sealing. After 24 hours, you're going to check your seals, and you can check them by pressing your finger on the lid. It says, listen, it's not going to come off. That's what's going to happen. You're going to take your screw tops off and the lid's not going to come off. But the next thing you're going to do is you're going to clean your jars because, and you can take a washcloth, run them under water and clean the top of them. Some of them will be a little bit sticky on top and some of the jars will be a little sticky. If you're doing jams or something like that, some kind of fruit, that's okay. You can clean it off then. I like to clean them, dry them, and then, most important, labeling them. I always label with the product, the date, and anything special that I've done in there. Like if I like using Pomona's pectin because it's a very low sugar pectin, and I mark that on my labels. The labels I use, you can go to Office Depot and there's real pricey, fancy, cute labels. But I've found that if I use printer labels, address labels, I can print a whole page of labels and then you just stick them on and you're fine. I prefer sticking them on the jar personally instead of on the top. Reason being, if I have cherry jelly, let's say, or jam, say I made some cherry jam, and I take the top off, when I refrigerate it, I like to replace it with one of those plastic lids because it's just convenient. and then you lose your label. You don't know what it is after a while. So I like putting it on the jar itself, and I notice they clean off well. The address labels clean off well. So when you select food for canning, always choose good quality fresh foods. Discard anything diseased or moldy. Process as quick as you can after harvest. You're going to rinse, not soak, and you can rinse your fruit or vegetable 3 times. Preservation isn't going to improve the food. So if you've got something that tastes bad before it goes into the jar, it's not going to taste any better coming out of the jar. Canning fruits. Only use high quality product. Sugar improves quality, texture, taste, but not necessarily safety. To prevent darkening of fruit, you can pre-treat it in a different number of ways. One of the things you can do is dissolve 6 500 milligram vitamin C tablets in a gallon of water, and then say you cut the pears, and the pears turn brown pretty quick. You throw them in that water before you get to the canning process. Same with apples. Or you can mix a tablespoon of bottled lemon juice in a gallon of water, or you can use commercial ascorbic acid. There's a product called Fruit Fresh, and that's something that you can buy at Wilco for sure, definitely at Bob's. There's 2 different ways of canning fruit. You can can raw pack or you can can hot pack. Raw pack means the jars are filled tightly with freshly prepared, unheated food, okay? And they're showing carrots, but of course carrots isn't anything you're going to water bath can. What I would have put in there is maybe some peaches, which you can definitely water bath can. Hot foods for hot, it tastes fresher. The fruit, oh no, this is for raw pack, I'm sorry. The fruit may float. Trapped air causes discoloration during storage, and foods can lose shape in the cooking. They don't look as pretty when you raw pack. And you can't pack as much in there as you think you can. It always shrinks up. Hot pack means the food is brought to a boil, simmered for 3 to 5 minutes, and then packed in jars. You can get more food in the jar. The food might taste slightly cooked. Less oxygen results in better color and nutrient retention. There's less of that fruit float that you see in the raw packed. And it's the preferred pack style for food in boiling water bath. But it's also more time consuming, so it depends on what your time is. Liquids used to fill jars. You can use any kind of liquid to cover the fruits in canning. The best thing you can do is you can make either a light, medium, or heavy syrup. But other liquids that you can use are fruit juice, or alcohol liquor, or just plain water. There's a couple of things that are kind of nice to do. You can do peaches in orange juice, pears or apples in pineapple juice, berries and cranberry juice. I think I'm going to try apples and pineapple juice this year. I haven't tried it. But it must be boiling. Whatever kind of water you use, it's got to be boiling. Types of sugar. You can use beet or cane sugar. Gives the best product in jams and jellies. Other sugars you can use liquid sugar, honey, dextrose, artificial sweeteners. But in jams and jellies, there's different rules about substituting different sweeteners. And I think some of the artificial sweeteners might change the flavor a lot. I haven't tried it. What I have tried is the Pomona's pectin and very low sugar. And that to me works best. Then you taste the fruit. You don't taste the sugar. Some of the amount of sugar you need to make some of the jams and jellies is just really high. Syrups and sauces. You can definitely can syrups and sauces. You puree and heat your fruit. It has to be following an approved recipe. You can put it in a water bath canner. Apple sauces and other fruits are similar. You can cook them down longer to thicken them, but don't add any thickeners. Butters are a much thicker product, but always use an approved recipe. There is currently no approved recipe for pumpkin butter because it's too dense and they haven't found a way to really heat the middle. Whether it's water bath or pressure canning, no pumpkin butter. You can can pumpkins in chunks, and then when you take it out of the jar, you can make pumpkin butter, but you can't can it. Pie fillings. Pie fillings are wonderful to make, but do not use thickeners such as tapioca or flour or cornstarch. They cause it again to be too thick, the filling, and the heat can't get in there to really safely kill the organisms. Pie fillings may separate. You can process in a water bath canner, but what you should use is clear gel. Clear gel is derived from cornstarch. It thickens easily and doesn't break down during processing. Use regular clear gel, not instant. It's not available in any grocery store that I've seen. You can buy some on Amazon. You can also buy some at Bob's. We used to have some at the Clark County Extension Office. I don't know that we still do. But it can be used as a thickener in jams and jellies. You need quite a bit of it. Canning problems. Seal failure. If your seals don't click like they're supposed to, you've either used, some of the causes are old or reused lids. And some people look at those lids and they look brand new after they take them out, so they think they can use them again. But if I'm going to go to all that trouble to can a product, I don't want it not to seal because I've taken the easy way out. And by the way, lids, I went to Winco on Sunday, none on the racks. I went to Wilco last week, none. I mean, I'm stocked up. I always, when I see them on sale, I buy a lot. So I have quite a few, but scary about the product that's not out there. Anyways, if it fails to seal, spoilage due to improper processing, or you haven't cleaned off the rims properly. How to prevent that? Of course, use new lids. Check the rims. Make sure the rims of the jars aren't damaged at all. Use the correct time and method, and wipe before closing your jars. What to do if you have a seal fail? Foods that were underprocessed, or if a jar fails to seal, can be reprocessed again only in the first 24 hours. Alternatives, you have something that didn't seal, you can freeze it. Make sure there's proper headspace. I use about 1 inch headspace, but you can freeze it in the jars with 1 inch headspace because it'll expand in the freezer. You can also refrigerate and use it in a few days. Don't reprocess. If you find a jar in your cupboard and all of a sudden the seal has broken, don't think you can reprocess it then. Remember, it's only within the first 24 hours that you can reprocess. Canning problems. One of the big canning problems is thermal shock. And thermal shock will happen if there's an extreme change in temperature, which is why you want your jars to be warm, in a boiling water canner before you fill them. If there's no rack in the canner, you'll get thermal shock. Thermal shock means the jar will break. Splashing cold water on hot jars. If your jars are cooling on a surface and there's a big draft, they could break. Pressure breakage will also come from too little headspace. The ring bands tighten too tight, unsteady heat in the canner, decreased pressure too fast in a pressure canner, which we're not going to talk about pressure canning. Impact breakage. Using a jar that received trauma from poor handling, like you took a sharp object to remove air bubbles, that could cause it to break. Siphoning. Siphoning just means loss of liquid in jars. You get it out and there's not as much liquid as there was when you put it in. That can happen if the jars are packed too tightly and the liquid did not fill the space, if there's not enough headspace, if starchy food absorbed liquid, if you didn't remove the air bubbles, if jars weren't covered with 1 to 2 inches of water, if jars are too quickly removed from the canner. You've got to give it the 5 minutes for that boil to stop, lid to be off before you remove it from the canner. Determining if food is safe to eat. Was it canned by up-to-date instructions from reliable sources and followed explicitly? Is the jar sealed? Are there no obvious signs of spoilage? High acid foods that are spoiled or that you might suspect are spoiled can be either flushed down the toilet or put in a garbage disposal with lots of water. Signs of spoilage: incorrectly processed low acid foods. Well, we're not going to talk about low acid because we're not going to talk about pressure canning. If the liquid is cloudy, but that could also be caused by added salt or minerals in the water, if it has a strange odor, if there's mold, if the jar doesn't seal. And one of our kind of phrases is a sealed jar is not always a safe jar. So if you do see mold growth, even if the jar is sealed, you're not going to want to eat the product. Also, I just want to add, storing your jars. When I store my jars, after I have washed them, after I've taken the screw tops off, I always store them with the screw tops off. Reason being, with the screw top on, if a seal comes undone, it might then seal up again because the screw top is on. So always store with the screw top off. You'll know immediately if the seal comes undone. Also, don't stack your jars unless you have a piece of cardboard in between. Thank you all for coming.